Hello, I'm the Contrarian's Apprentice with a quick reminder here that it is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. With that out of the way, this is my thought experiment. Is Trump more of a liberal than Hillary Clinton? To start, Trump wants to, and I quote, take care of people. And he means this not in the traditional Republican way of trickle down economics. That idea is that simply we'll make the economy so great that everyone will be taken care of. Rather, Trump has supported universal and single payer healthcare systems in the United States. On the campaign trail, Trump has hidden behind rhetorical statements like, people won't be dying in the streets when I'm president, but there's only really one way to do that: socialized healthcare. In his actual plan, he wants to have an expansion of Medicare and Medicaid to cover more people. And while I doubt this is going to cover everyone, it should cover at least the poor, if not also the middle class. This puts his plan just a step behind Bernie's, that clearly wants to have such an extension cover everyone. This is in stark contrast to Hillary Clinton, who just wants to keep up the status quo, i.e., a continuation of the Less Than Perfect Affordable Care Act. Secondly, Trump is more able and he is also more willing than Clinton to raise taxes on the wealthy. Throughout his entire career and regularly throughout this campaign trail, he's advocated for raising taxes on the rich. Keep in mind that conservatism is almost defined by trickle down economics. Being wealthy himself, it's hard for other Republican candidates to attack him on this point regarding raising taxes. He can use himself as anecdotal evidence saying that wealthy aren't paying their fair share. And with the limited time that they have in a debate situation, such anecdotal evidence is really difficult to attack. He uses the same techniques when talking about the need to get money out of politics. But let's go back to taxations. It would be toxic for any of the other Republican candidates to regularly suggest tax increases on the wealthy. So, if Trump is taking aim at the wealthy in debates, why are more people attacking him on this issue? If it's such a taboo among conservatives, why are so many conservatives supporting Trump? Well, this is in two parts. The first part is the marketing genius of Trump and the ignorance of the public. He stated, and he's clearly stated, that he wants to raise taxes on the rich, but his actual plan does the opposite, lowering the top tax rate from about 40% to 25%. And you can argue about closing loopholes like capital gains, that will generate some taxes, but the clear result of Trump's plan, the one that he's put on paper, is a large tax cut for top earners. So his plan is either a clever facade or a clear sign of incompetence. It's strategic in that if Trump had actually put on paper to raise taxes on the wealthy, the news headlines would have been deadly. His current approach of saying one thing in person but another on paper allows him to say how he feels while protecting himself from the conservative media. Distinguishing which is the truth, though, is kind of difficult. But historically, he's advocated for increased taxes on the wealthy, and that's what he currently says. Contrast this with Hillary, who wants to basically leave the tax system as it is. Now, on the issue of trade policy, specifically NAFTA and the Trans Pacific Partnership. Now, I don't want to put too much emphasis on this point because trade deals are very complicated, but Trump is clearly against both. And when it comes to Clinton, there's a little bit of room for debate, but she's at least supported NAFTA for a period of time and advocated for the Trans Pacific Partnership during her time as Secretary of State, while stronger progressives such as Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders have been more skeptical of such trade deals from the start. Now, there's some things that Trump has said that sound way worse on the surface than they actually are, and I want to address these things, or at least do my best to address them. So let's take his comments about the quote Muslim problem. He's advocated for increased screening of Muslims and a variety of other policies relating to the refugee crisis that appear racially charged. And some of them sound quite horrendous. But are his fears rooted in any fact? And the simple answer to this is Sweden. While I don't have time for it in this video, Sweden is now the rape capital of Europe, having an over 500% increase in rape cases in the last couple of years. 70% of these rapes were committed by Muslims, largely by those coming in as refugees. And while it sounds insane, I encourage you to look into this Swedish rape epidemic more. Additionally, other countries are dealing with strains on their infrastructure, their social services, police forces, public safety, and other issues. All of this to say is that there's some substance behind Trump's concerns. And while they sound bad and they may be horribly articulated, there are reasons behind it. And on a side note, I'm anti nationalism, I'm typically pro immigrant by nature, but there are observable trends that at least warrant a debate about how to mitigate the potential risks when handling the refugee crisis. Simply calling Trump a bigot without, considering the possibility that there may be good reason behind his policies is both a bit judgmental and a little ignorant. Remember that even a broken clock is right twice a day. Now on to maybe the worst Tabasco, and that is the Mexican comments. And well, if you actually look through them, they're pretty edited. I would encourage you to actually listen to the full, you know, maybe not the full speech, but more than 30 seconds worth. There is probably a fair bit of prejudice rolling around his head, but the statements aren't the type of blatant racism they've been trying to portray it as. There is a real border issue. There is a actual problem. In my opinion, legalization, of drugs is the best way to reduce violence at the border and these gang-related crimes. But those are all arguments for another day. I mean this to say that while they sound bad, there is a problem going on, and there are different solutions to those. A wall is not the answer. So we come down to the point of why is he so flamboyant? Why make racist and sexist sounding remarks? And that's very simple. To get support from the far right and get media coverage. He's been great at getting media coverage. And why won't he be so direct with his liberal agenda? Another very easy question: to get votes. If Trump came out with a clear plan to raise taxes and get money out of politics and create a universal healthcare plan, while probably advocating for the legalization of soft drugs, something he's been on and off about for the last 2 decades, he wouldn't have a chance at winning the Republican nomination. The last few election cycles, he's hinted at running as a way to get free publicity and feedback. Each time he's modified his portrayal of himself to gauge how the media and the public will view him. At his core, Donald Trump is a marketer, and this is actually quite smart. Without spending any money and with very little effort, he's gotten about a decade's worth of feedback from the public and the media as to how to run a successful campaign. Or he's just a loon. So we've gone over policies that Trump has that are quite liberal, and we've gone over a few topics that are a bit touchy but not too hard to explain away. But there are some topics that are very hard to explain away if Donald Trump is an actual liberal as we describe it to be, or as we believe it to be, or as we understand it. These are lots of ways to say the same thing. But anyway, for one thing, he's against the EPA, or the non existent Department of Environmental Protection. Now, he could just be saying this because it's the cool thing for Republicans to do. They have to find a way to cut spending, so they will say, I'll cut XYZ department. There's not a lot of content behind it. It is kind of hard to explain away, but I'm not looking into it too much. Just on a side note, he could have tried harder to find a way to cut costs. Like, you could said some bullshit like, oh, combine some agencies with similar tasks to save on administration costs. It just sounds so much better than the bullshit he said. Anyway, we get to the point in my script that gets me really mad. So I'm going to say it how the script was originally written, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit later. I spent about 2 hours looking into this, and Donald Trump has been against the minimum wage. For a period of time, he entertained the idea of a split minimum wage, where entry-level workers and more experienced workers have different entry minimum wages. But he's been primarily against minimum wage. He wants to keep it the way it is. While I would love to raise the minimum wage to $12 or $15 an hour, there are complications to it. Even Bill Gates, one of those most prominent progressive billionaires, warns about raising the minimum wage too fast or too high. And all I'm saying is that it's worth having a debate over, and that it's not necessarily being anti-progressive if you're hesitant about raising the minimum wage. More to come about this conversation in my closing notes. Another thing that's hard to explain away is that Trump has primarily been anti-welfare, and his beliefs on social programs is a bit fuzzy. Obviously, this is one of his more conservative stances. And so, what does this all mean? In one case, Trump is the great unifier by pulling Republican voters to the center, such as convincing them that those at the top aren't paying their fair share. In the House and the Senate, some Republicans may follow his more progressive lead. On issues such as, let's say, a Medicare or Medicaid type expansion, he could draw support from some Republicans while most Democrats would automatically support such an expansion. This bipartisanship could reach a majority, actually creating a more functional Congress. This is best case scenario. But perhaps I'm wrong, and Trump is just a conservative. It could be the case that he says two things like, in his tax plan, and he runs with a more conservative stance. The assumptions I created at the start sidestep issues such as his questionable character, the impossibility of many of his policies, his inability to grasp foreign relations, and his overly aggressive approach to nearly every issue, which makes me a tad bit nervous. So, how do we tell if Trump is just a liberal pretending to be Republican, or the crazy racist business failure that, many consider him to be? Well, don't fear, I have the answer. So, when Trump gets the nomination, which at this point he basically has, it'll be Trump and Hillary, and he might make a bid in order to appeal to more independent voters, knowing that nearly all Republicans will happily cast an anti Hillary vote. Even if they don't like him, he can afford to be more, quote, liberal with his liberal beliefs. Trump will be more direct with his more progressive agenda and will take more care to avoid racist and sexist comments. Keep in mind, though, that it's a definite possibility that Trump is once again playing a character and just trying to get votes. It doesn't necessarily mean that I am correct or that he is liberal if he does do these things. The more I've watched Trump, the more I think he's just an incompetent marketer out of his league. I don't endorse Trump, but in a Trump-Hillary election, which seems to be the situation, I don't know who I'd vote for. I'm not really happy about either of them. But now we get to the irritating part of the video. This is past my script, and this deals with what's been said just a few days ago, and that is Trump now supporting the minimum wage, which is something that I painstakingly checked to make sure he had never supported, and now he supports it, which seems to it seems to add to this idea that Trump may actually just be a liberal. It can be so difficult piecing through his history and the little information we have and what he's saying now, and trying to parse what's an act, what's personification, what's him trying to get votes. He's even himself addressed that he's not acting presidential, that he's playing a character. And it is very difficult to piece together, is Trump the great unifier, or is he a madman?